Chapter 7: The Silver Chamber. There was something fundamentally offensive about being kidnapped and then placed in what could only be described as a designer prison cell. Evelyn had expected cold stone, rusted chains, maybe even dramatic echoes. Instead, she got silver-trimmed walls that pulsed faintly with arcane symbols, a ceiling inlaid with reflective metal she was reasonably sure acted like a surveillance dome, and a cot with an actual mattress. No pillow, of course. Even ancient wolf monarchs knew better than to offer too much comfort to a potential magical threat. The chamber smelled faintly of burnt ozone and lavender. Like an alchemy lab and a luxury spa had entered a toxic relationship and never broke up. And the walls? They whispered. Not in voices, thankfully, but in sensation. Standing too close to them made her skin itch, like the air itself was charged with intention. Every breath felt thinner. Every thought, a little slower. Like the silver was leeching not just strength, but will. Evelyn sat cross-legged on the cot, arms wrapped around herself, trying to focus on her breathing. 4 in, hold for 4, out for 4. Her therapist would be so proud. Not that it helped. Nothing helped in a cage designed to study her. It had been 12 hours. Or maybe 30. Time was hard to track in a room with no windows, no clock, and a constant soft humming that oscillated between barely perceptible and maddening. She tried to trace the runes lining the chamber walls, but they responded to touch like motion sensor lights, flickering, dimming, reactivating. Intelligent design. Magical tech. Possibly a closed-loop system using her own biofield as input. If she weren't being imprisoned inside it, she might have admired the engineering. "You're studying me," she muttered to no one, pacing now. "Of course you are. Classic apex predator behavior. Observe the anomaly. Poke the thing with the stick." She stopped in front of the largest sigil. It resembled a crescent cradling an eye, surrounded by concentric circles. It pulsed faintly when she got too close. "So what do you want from me?" she asked the room. "Magic? Prophecy? Spontaneous combustion?" The walls said nothing. Figures. Magnus arrived precisely when she began to wish he wouldn't. He entered not through a door, but via a seamless panel that slid away like an obedient illusion. No sound. No ceremony. Just his presence, pressing in like cold fog. Today, he wore a dark tunic embroidered with pale runes and gloves that gleamed like polished armor. Evelyn didn't stand. "I hope the accommodations are acceptable," he said mildly, surveying her with the cool indifference of a researcher about to dissect a particularly rare frog. "I give it a 3-star rating," she replied. "Would have been higher if I had a pillow and, freedom." Magnus smiled faintly. "Freedom is such a fragile concept. You gave it up the moment you chose him." "I didn't choose anything," she said. "I found a lost dog. That's not destiny. That's misplaced empathy." "But you stayed," he said, stepping closer. "You followed him here. Into my kingdom. Into this court. You saw the truth, and you didn't run." She rose then, slowly, pulse thudding. "What do you want from me?" Magnus studied her, head tilted slightly. "I want to know what you are. I'm human." "No, Evelyn Hartwood. You were. Before the bond. Before the dream. Before he began to remember you." His eyes glittered. "You are becoming something else." She crossed her arms. "Your people keep saying that. Becoming. Echoes. Rebirth. No one's explaining what it means." "Because we don't know," Magnus said. "Not fully. Daisy's power was singular. Spiritual and biological. She changed us with her blood. With her sacrifice. You carry that echo. I didn't ask for any of this." Neither did she. There was a moment, a charged silence in which Evelyn wasn't sure if she wanted to scream or laugh. Possibly both. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. "Drain it out of me." He smiled. Not kindly. "I'm going to wake it up." The collar was brought in by 2 robed attendants, wolfkin in ceremonial dress, their faces half covered by veils woven with silver thread. The device they carried looked more like a torque than a chain, wide and smooth, designed to sit at the base of the neck. It didn't glow. Not yet. Evelyn took an instinctive step back. "That's not happening." "It won't hurt," Magnus said, tone reasonable in a way that made her skin crawl. It only reacts to magical resonance. If you truly have no power, it will do nothing. And if I do? He smiled. Then we begin. She didn't move. The attendants approached. Lucian wouldn't want this, she said sharply. Magnus's gaze didn't falter. Lucian has already given me everything he had to give. That did it. The fury snapped through her like a switchblade. She lunged, not at Magnus, but toward the collar itself, grabbing it before the attendants could respond. It pulsed in her palm once, twice, and then flared with a brilliant, blinding light. The attendants cried out. The collar fell from her hands. And the wall behind her bloomed open. Not cracked. Not splintered. Opened. As if it had been waiting for her. The runes on the chamber walls surged in color, violet, silver, gold, swirling like the double helix of DNA unraveling midair. Energy whipped through the room, not chaotic, but rhythmic. Measured. Alive. Evelyn stood in the center of it, chest heaving, hair lifting in the current. Magnus's expression, for the first time, faltered. You are not an echo, he said, voice low. You are the spark. The silence that followed was not empty. It was the kind that pressed against her eardrums, thick with a kind of sentient stillness, like the chamber itself had stopped breathing, waiting to see what she would do next. The silver collar lay at Evelyn's feet, inert now, its surface dull and cracked along the seam. It hadn't exploded. It hadn't burned her flesh or siphoned her soul into a glowing jar, as she half expected. Instead, it had simply reacted. To her. Magnus stood across the chamber, no longer expressionless. His face was unreadable, yes, but not in the curated, icy way she'd grown accustomed to. Now there was something new behind his eyes, something less elegant. Less composed. Hunger. You felt it, he said. Evelyn didn't answer. She couldn't. Her body was still humming, vibrating with some frequency that didn't belong to this world, or at least not the one she knew. Her skin was warm, but not from exertion. Her fingers tingled, not with adrenaline, but with recognition. Like every cell had just been handed a blueprint it didn't know it had been missing. It wasn't power. Not exactly. It was resonance. You activated the seal, Magnus said, voice quieter now, almost reverent. Without instruction. Without pain. That's not merely inheritance. That's instinct. She stepped back as he approached, but it wasn't fear that propelled her. It was defiance. Whatever he thought he saw in her, whatever calculations he was running behind those storm-silver eyes, she was not going to become a variable in someone else's equation. I didn't activate anything, she said, lifting her chin. Your torture device broke. Magnus stopped just short of her, his gaze moving from her face to her hands and then to the now glowing runes crawling along the walls like constellations. Don't insult your own evolution by pretending this is accidental. The keep responds to lineage. To fate. You've proven what you are. And what exactly am I? She asked, biting the words. Because so far, you've called me an echo, a catalyst, a spark. I'm waiting for you to say weapon. Just get it over with. He didn't deny it. Not even a pause. Instead, he said, you're what Daisy feared she might become. The part of her magic that wasn't bound by sacrifice, but by ambition. The part she buried. Evelyn's stomach turned, but she didn't look away. I'm not Daisy. You carry her power. I carry myself. A beat passed between them. Magnus exhaled, slow and thoughtful. You were never meant to be Lucian's mate. That landed like a slap, more for its certainty than its cruelty. Evelyn's jaw locked. And yet he chose me. Wolves don't choose. Magnus's tone was sharp now. They're drawn. The bond is older than language. It doesn't ask permission. It simply is. She shook her head. You're wrong. He's more than that bond. And so am I. You're confusing possession with affection, he said. What Lucian feels for you is chemical. Biological. He would mark a rock if it bled the right frequency. She stared at him. And you would shackle a star if it lit your path. For the first time, Magnus looked impressed. Perhaps even amused. Careful, he murmured. Your words are beginning to sound like prophecy. I'm not interested in fulfilling prophecies, she said. I'm interested in getting out of this gilded box. He nodded once, slowly. Then prove you can. She blinked. Excuse me? You're standing in a chamber designed to suppress transformation. Silver embedded in every surface. Runes calibrated to draw out latent power. If you truly carry Daisy's mark, then you can manipulate the field. He gestured around them. Open the wall again. On purpose this time. Evelyn hesitated. Because she wanted to. Not for him, not for the court, not even for the sake of proving her identity, but for herself. To know, with scientific certainty, that this wasn't madness or fantasy. That it was real. She walked to the center of the room, closed her eyes, and listened. Not to her thoughts, but to the strange, low-frequency pulse she'd felt since arriving in the keep. It was in the stone, yes, but also beneath her skin. Like a second pulse. A second rhythm. She reached for it. Her hands warmed. The air shifted. And the wall in front of her, metal, etched with moon ring sigils, peeled open with a shuddering sigh, revealing not a hallway, but a black corridor spiraling upward like a spinal column made of obsidian. Evelyn opened her eyes. Magnus's gaze sharpened. You're ready, he said. No, she corrected. I'm done waiting. He didn't stop her from walking through the passage. In fact, he stepped aside, a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had been set in motion was now bigger than both of them. You'll see what's coming, he said as she passed. And when you do, you'll wish you were just human. Evelyn didn't respond. Because somewhere in the heart of that magic ancient, fierce, wild, she already knew. She was never just anything. And neither was Lucian. Chapter 8 Memories and Fire. Magic, it turned out, felt a lot like fever. Not in the romantic, sparkly sense often reserved for novels and fan forums, but in the gritty, cellular way like every molecule in Evelyn's body had suddenly remembered it could burn. She wasn't walking through the obsidian corridor so much as being pulled, as if the air itself recognized her now. The walls vibrated with low-frequency hums, the kind of sound you felt more than heard, and with each step, the heat beneath her skin intensified. Her heart beat too fast. Her vision shimmered like a mirage in a desert. Anthea's words echoed in her memory. You are not Daisy. But you carry her fire. Evelyn didn't know what that fire meant. Whether it was love or destruction, prophecy or punishment. But as she reached the heart of the keep, through a spiraling passage that finally opened into a domed chamber lined with mirrors that were not mirrors, but slabs of polished moonstone, she began to understand one thing. Magic was memory. Not metaphorically. Literally. It was a recall system. A living archive. And she was the key. The first time it hit her, she wasn't ready. It started with the mirror directly ahead, her own reflection staring back, wild-eyed and flushed. But then the image changed. A flicker. And suddenly, she wasn't alone. There was a woman behind her. Pale-skinned, hair like ink, crowned in flame. Evelyn turned, heart hammering, but no one was there. Back to the mirror. The woman was still watching. No, waiting. Remember me, she said, though her mouth didn't move. The chamber lit from within. Runes carved into the floor glowed with a coppery light, casting elongated patterns across the walls. Evelyn staggered back, overwhelmed by the sudden scent of cedar, blood, and something sweet, honey. Incense. Her hand brushed one of the runes, and the vision struck like a current. She was no longer Evelyn Hartwood. She was her. Standing in the middle of a burning glade, the sky above her split with thunder. Wolves circled around her, injured and blooded, panting with grief. Her own hands were slick with red, her magic had torn through enemies and kin alike. All to save him. He stood before her, barefoot and half-shifted, his face streaked with ash and betrayal. His golden eyes glistened. You chose them over me. No, she whispered, heartbreaking. I chose us. This is the only way. Then let me die. She stepped back. I can't. I won't. She lifted her hands. And the fire consumed everything. The memory shattered like glass. Evelyn dropped to her knees in the present, gasping. The stone beneath her steamed where her palms touched it. The chamber was no longer pulsing gently. It was alive, reacting to her presence the way the body reacts to fever, sweat, heat, tremors. She could feel it now, the blood memory. The echo of Daisy's final moments, not as a noble sacrifice but as a calculated, terrifying decision. Daisy had burned the world to save him. And now Evelyn was being asked, would you do it again? She didn't know. But Lucien was still alive. And she had to find him. Elsewhere in the keep, Lucien jolted upright in his bed, chest heaving, vision clouded with heat. He felt her. Not just the bond, he'd always felt the soft tether between them, the way her scent lingered in his dreams like summer lightning. This was different. Sharper. Like her voice had been carved into the marrow of his bones and was finally speaking again. Fire, his body whispered. He gasped, clutching his temples. Visions came in fragments, a woman crowned in flame, a circle of wolves kneeling, the scent of her skin laced with magic and sorrow. He heard her voice call his name, not Lucien. Not even Wolf. My heart, she had said. Even in fire, I will find you. He doubled over, panting. The collar pulsed. But this time, it wasn't pain. It was recognition. And it was cracking. Back in the moonstone chamber, Evelyn rose unsteadily to her feet. Her skin still buzzed, her vision still haloed in light. But her heart was steady now. Steady in a way it hadn't been since she first stepped into this impossible world. The fire wasn't destroying her. It was revealing her. Every time she stepped into that mirror glow, she saw more pieces of a life not her own but undeniably hers. She saw Daisy raising her hands to the sky. She saw wolves standing in formation. She saw herself at the center of something enormous, dangerous, beautiful. But most of all, she saw him. Lucien. The man. The beast. The boy beneath the fur. The prince who had knelt in ash and called her name. He was waiting. And she would not let history break them again. The moonstone chamber had no visible exit. Which made sense, Evelyn supposed, since it hadn't had a visible entrance either. One moment, she had stepped through a rune-split wall like Alice tumbling down the wolf-infested rabbit hole, and now she was standing in a sanctum of memory where time curved and fire remembered her name. She should have felt trapped. Instead, she felt seen. The mirrors on the walls, moonstone slabs, really no longer reflected her as she was. They reflected versions. Not illusions, not hallucinations, but possibilities. Her face, her frame, shifted across time. In one mirror, she wore black ceremonial robes and a silver circlet etched with runes. In another, she was half-blooded and wild-eyed, hair tangled, dress torn, one hand extended in rage. In another still, she was smiling, tired, resolute, her fingers intertwined with Lucien's. Not the version who'd shivered beside her hearth, or the one who'd collapsed in pain under the weight of a collar. This Lucien was fully himself. Tall. Confident. Equal parts wolf and man. Golden-eyed and terribly, achingly gentle. It broke something open inside her. Because the truth was, she didn't know if that future existed yet. But they did. Somewhere. Sometime. And maybe, just maybe, it could exist again. Evelyn walked the chamber in slow circles, hands brushing the stone like a scientist mapping a living organism. The air here didn't move like normal air, it pulsed in rhythmic waves, responsive and intelligent. And when she reached the center of the room, the pulse quickened. She closed her eyes and dropped to her knees. If this place was a memory vault, then perhaps it was hers to open. She lowered her palms to the floor and let her body relax, let her mind stretch past the noise of fear and logic, past the static of disbelief, until she found that hum again, the one that lived just beneath her heartbeat. A frequency not of sound, but of self. And then, like breath drawn after drowning, the vision struck. The battlefield was slick with rain and blood. She stood at its center, alone. The wolves had fallen. Hundreds of them. Their bodies strewn like storm debris across the clearing, tangled with silver pikes and the shredded remnants of banners. The humans had fled, but the damage was done. He was kneeling again. Lucien, no, the man he had been, held himself upright with effort, his shoulder bleeding, his chest streaked with soot. "You shouldn't have come," he rasped. She walked toward him, slow but steady. Her power was fraying at the edges now, but she clung to it. It wasn't rage that moved her anymore. It was love. And the unbearable clarity of knowing this would be the last time she'd hold him. "I couldn't let them end you," she said. "Even if it means ending myself." His hand reached for hers. They didn't speak again. The fire did the talking. When she opened her eyes, tears were already slipping down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from pain, or confusion, or even grief. She was crying because the part of her that had always felt unfinished, like a melody interrupted mid-note, had finally found its chorus. Lucien hadn't just been a wolf who stumbled into her life. He'd been waiting. For centuries. And now they were both awake. Across the keep, Lucien gasped. The collar cracked. Not in a metaphorical way, not some quiet poetic unraveling. Literally. A line split down its surface like a tectonic fracture, and the silver etched into it glowed bright red before flickering into ash. His body surged with heat. His bones realigned, painlessly this time. Not a forced shift, but a choice. His claws lengthened, not out of fear but resolve. His back straightened. And when he stood, the guards outside his chamber scrambled. Because Lucien didn't look weak anymore. He looked sovereign. The connection between them was no longer a thread. It was a bridge. He could feel her warm, pulsing like a heartbeat at the edge of his awareness. Not just her presence. Her memory. He saw her hands. Her eyes. Her voice layered with past and present. She had called him my heart in a life long gone. Now, she called him by his name. Lucien. And every part of him answered. In the moonstone chamber, Evelyn felt the air shift. The heat faded slightly. The runes softened. The mirrors cleared. And from somewhere, nowhere, a voice spoke. Not aloud, but through her mind. The mate remembers. The mark is reborn. She stood, legs trembling but strong. The chamber opened behind her. And this time, she didn't hesitate. She was going to him. Because this wasn't about prophecy. It was about choosing. And she chose him. Chapter 9: The Escape. Evelyn didn't run. She walked. Through the curved passage of stone that had once breathed with ancient heat, now calm. Through the bone-lined corridor Magnus had marched her down, now still. Her steps were steady, her hands loose at her sides, the silver pendant pressing warm and bright against her chest like a second heartbeat. The keep recognized her now not as an outsider, not as a curiosity, but as something it could not contain. Her magic was not rage. It wasn't firestorm or vengeance. It was choice. And she had chosen Lucien. The guards at the inner gate didn't see her coming. That was their mistake. The first one stepped forward with the bored confidence of someone who had never been overpowered by a 5'7" woman glowing faintly with ancestral magic. "Return to your chambers," he said, voice clipped. She lifted her eyes to his, quiet and direct. "No." And then she raised her palm. Not to strike. To open. The runes etched in her skin, temporary, born from contact with the moonstone, lit like stars. The air bent. The guards flew backward as if shoved by a force they couldn't comprehend. Respectfully, Evelyn murmured, brushing past their stunned bodies, "I'm done being detained." Lucien felt her before she entered. The collar had fallen off completely hours, no, minutes ago. He was still relearning how to breathe without it, how to stand without the weight of its suppression digging into the root of his spine. His body was stronger now. Grounded. But his mind was reeling. Not from pain. Not from fear. From her. She was fire and cedar and rain on old stone. She was a sound he hadn't heard in centuries and still somehow remembered. She stepped into the room like gravity bent toward her. And Lucien, half shifted, panting, eyes rimmed in gold, looked up and said, "You found me." Evelyn crossed the threshold, slower now. The sight of him, bare-chested, kneeling on one leg like some shattered altar statue, did something sharp and delicate to her ribcage. "I never lost you," she whispered. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then stopped. She dropped to her knees. There was no grand romantic gesture. No orchestral swell. Just her hands, warm and real, pressing against his shoulders, her forehead resting against his. The silence between them pulsed with memory, tension, and the slow realization that they had not broken each other, despite everything. Lucian whispered, "You burned for me." "I would again," she said, voice soft but sure. "But I'd rather not." He gave a hoarse, surprised laugh. "You sound like her." "She sounds like me," Evelyn corrected. "Just with more dramatic exits." His eyes met hers, wolf and man, past and present. "I remember your voice. I remember your touch." Her fingers brushed his jaw, her expression turning serious. "We're not just echoes, Lucian. We're people. And I'm not leaving you behind this time." He pulled her hand into his, laced their fingers together. "Then we run." The keep was not built for quiet departures. Its architecture assumed reverence or conquest, worshippers kneeling at the obsidian altar, prisoners dragged in chains. No one simply left. But Evelyn wasn't trying to outpace the guards or sneak past Magnus's surveillance. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was walking out. Lucian shifted beside her as they moved through the keep's lower halls, fluid, half-wolf, body-scarred but no longer broken. His strength had returned in pulses, violent and steady, like tidewaters rising. The silver was gone. His eyes were golden. But the way he looked at her, that was new. Not as a mate. Not as a cursebreaker. But as a partner. And that, more than anything, made Evelyn feel like the woman Daisy never had the chance to become. "Where's Magnus?" Lucian asked as they crept toward the open stone hall where the temple met the throne corridor. Evelyn didn't look back. Busy calculating how much control he just lost. Lucian's mouth quirked. "He'll come for you. He'll try. You're not afraid." She glanced at him. "I'm furious. There's a difference." Lucian reached out and hooked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're different now. I'm awake now." The sound of footsteps approached, steady, armored. Lucian shifted in front of her instinctively, half-crouched. But it was not Magnus. It was Isolde. Lucian's sister was dressed in hunter's black, her silver hair braided down her back. Her eyes widened the moment she saw Evelyn, and then she smirked. "Took you long enough," she said. "We've got a window. The old tunnels beneath the cistern haven't collapsed yet. But we have to move now." Evelyn blinked. "You're helping us." "I'm not fond of watching my baby brother get half killed on principle," Isolde said. "And the court's been boring without him." Lucian groaned. "You are chaos incarnate. I learned from the best." She shot Evelyn a sly look. "And I've never seen him look at anyone like that. Not even when he was still whole." Evelyn flushed. "We should move." Isolde nodded. "Follow me." And just like that, they ran. Not as fugitives. Not as fated souls escaping prophecy. But as people wounded, changed, choosing. Together. The old tunnels beneath the keep were not built for comfort or for humans, Evelyn was beginning to suspect. The ceiling arched just low enough to graze her hair when she stood upright, and the stone underfoot had the damp, uneven temperament of something that hadn't seen sunlight in several hundred years. Everything smelled faintly of cold iron, moss, and long-decayed intentions. Lucian moved ahead of her like a creature who had spent his entire life navigating shadows. Silent, sure-footed, and beautiful in that maddening, feral way that made Evelyn's pulse trip. Isolde followed close behind them, an easy smirk tugging at the edge of her mouth like this was all just a mildly inconvenient afternoon outing and not, in fact, a jailbreak from a blood-drenched supernatural monarchy. "We're close," she whispered, as they turned sharply into a narrower passage. "There's an outer gate near the western gorge. It opens once every 6 days during the moon drain, when the keep siphons magic from the surrounding ley lines. Magnus won't expect you to leave through it because, well, his Magnus." Evelyn blinked. "That's surprisingly helpful." Isolde gave a mock bow. "What can I say? I'm rebelliously competent." Lucian didn't speak, but his hand drifted toward Evelyn's without looking, catching her wrist in a light grip. Not possessive. Not territorial. Just there, a reminder. A promise. She squeezed his fingers. Then everything changed. The sound reached them first, a low, grinding moan, like stone shifting against stone. Then came the scent. Not just blood, but fresh blood. Magic tinged. Metallic and warm. Evelyn froze. Lucien turned, eyes glowing, his entire body locked in that terrible stillness that preceded either violence or sacrifice. "Run," he said. Isolde pulled a blade from her hip. "No one's running." The hallway ahead burst into chaos. 3 guards, elite, cloaked in black, rounded the corner at a dead sprint, and Evelyn didn't need to ask whose orders they followed. They were armed with silver-threaded pikes, their eyes unreadable, faces partially obscured by steel-woven masks etched with runes. One looked directly at her. Target acquired. Lucien stepped in front of her before the first blade struck. He didn't roar. He didn't grow claws or fangs or shift into some grotesque creature of rage. He moved with lethal grace. One moment, Evelyn saw his back. The next, she saw a body crumple to the ground, ribs caved in, blood flowering across the stone. "Stay behind me," he said, without turning. Isolde was already beside him, dancing between the other two with the kind of terrifying joy only a wolf bred on rebellion could summon. Evelyn crouched low, heart hammering, the coppery scent of violence thick in her lungs. Her instincts screamed at her to run. But something deeper whispered, "Stand." And she did. Her palm pressed to the wall. The stone responded. The rune from the moonstone chamber burned back to life beneath her skin, just one. A simple, circular sigil she remembered from the floor where she'd knelt and seen her own death. It pulsed. And the wall behind the final guard erupted outward, slamming into him like a wave of solid force. Lucien turned. Saw her. Stared. "You remembered," he said, softly. "I'm starting to," she replied. And then they ran. The gate wasn't a gate, exactly. More like a vertical crack in the cliffside sealed with petrified bark and threadbare enchantments. Isolde sliced through it with 2 swift motions of her blade, muttered something in an old dialect Evelyn only half understood, something about blood and sky and threshold, and the crack widened. Wind poured through, crisp and wild. They stepped out into night. Stars spilled across the sky like spilled salt, and the forest beyond shimmered silver under the wash of moonlight. It was colder here. Cleaner. Real. Isolde turned to them, expression briefly serious. "I'll mislead the trackers. You two need to disappear. There's an old ranger's path at the base of the gorge. Follow it for half a day. It will take you to Snowvale." Evelyn blinked. "You're not coming? Please. Court rebellion waits for no one." She smiled again, sharp as a fang. "Besides, I've never liked goodbyes." And then she was gone. They walked for a while in silence. Evelyn's limbs ached. Her lungs stung. Every cell in her body felt like it had been lit and blown out again. But the exhaustion was edged with clarity. Lucien walked beside her, a half step behind, as though he couldn't quite believe she was real. "I remember more now," he said finally. She glanced at him. "Yeah. I remember the first time you kissed me." Her breath hitched. "Before or after I burned the world?" He gave a soft huff of laughter. "Before. In a field of crushed violets. I told you I didn't believe in fate. You said fate was a convenient excuse for cowardice." Evelyn looked away, her throat tight. "Sounds like something I'd say. You kissed me anyway." They stopped walking. The forest around them sighed, tall trees rustling in sympathy. Lucien turned to her fully. "I was hers. Then I lost her." Evelyn met his gaze. "And now?" He stepped closer. "Not to claim. To ask. I don't want you because the bond demands it. I want you because you stayed. Because you chose." She stepped into him. "I'm choosing again," she said, voice breaking. "Every day. Every breath." His hands cupped her face. And when he kissed her, it wasn't desperate or possessive. It was true. Chapter 10 Blood Pact. The shelter was nothing more than a hollow beneath an outcropping of stone, partially shielded by pine branches and the rising curve of the mountain's edge. Snowvale loomed in the distance, recognizable now as more than just wilderness. It was the place where everything had begun. Where a man had crawled into her cabin wearing the shape of a black dog, and where she had mistaken fate for coincidence. Now she knew better. They hadn't returned to the cabin. Not yet. There was something sacred about this liminal space between escape and safety, between instinct and invitation. Something raw. Not in the dangerous way, but in the human way. Evelyn sat beside Lucien, her back pressed to the cool rock behind them, her legs curled under the worn fabric of her borrowed cloak. Her hair was damp with snowmelt, and her palms were still tingling from the runes that had guided their flight. Lucien sat close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the wildness just beneath the surface, tempered now by restraint. Not the kind born of suppression. The kind born of choice. He hadn't touched her since the kiss. Not because he didn't want to. She felt the way his eyes followed her when he thought she wasn't looking, how his hands trembled slightly whenever they hovered too near hers. But he was waiting. For her. You're quiet, Evelyn said, her voice low, not breaking the hush so much as weaving into it. Lucien was sharpening a small blade, an old habit she'd come to learn, that calmed his mind. The rhythmic scrape of metal against whetstone slowed at her words. I'm listening, he replied, not looking up. To you. To the wind. To the part of me that's finally stopped screaming. She turned to face him fully. Does it always scream? The wolf. Lucien met her eyes. When it's in pain, yes. When it's bound, muzzled, collared, it howls. But now, it watches. Waits. Learns. And me? She asked. What does it see when it looks at me? He was quiet for a beat too long. Then, home. Evelyn inhaled sharply. Not from surprise. But from recognition. Because even before the dreams and the fire and the blood-marked temples, she had known, somewhere deep in her bones, that he would be the person she'd end up coming back to. Again and again. And it terrified her. Because it wasn't rational. It wasn't safe. It wasn't scientific. It just was. I want to understand, she said after a while. The bond. The mating thing. You've never pushed it on me, and I'm grateful for that. But I need to know what it means. Not to wolves. To you. Lucien set down the blade. The wind picked up, stirring the pine around them like breath through a sleeping creature. It's instinct, he said, but not compulsion. The bond doesn't erase choice. It magnifies it. When I scent you, when I touch you, it isn't because I have to. It's because my whole body has memorized what it feels like to be near you. And it wants that memory to become permanent. Evelyn swallowed. And the marking? He shifted slightly. Not away, but inward. Toward honesty. It's ceremonial. Sacred. When wolves choose their mate, they mark them with scent and blood. Not as a cage, but as a promise. It's not always physical. It can be emotional. Spiritual. Erotic. She flushed. Right. The whole bone locked during copulation thing. He gave a soft laugh, low and warm. Yes. But that's not required. That's just biology being dramatic. Evelyn stared at him. I've never belonged to anyone, she whispered. Not really. Not the way you mean. I've built a life out of walls and logic and deciding when to leave before someone else does. Lucien didn't interrupt. But with you, it doesn't feel like losing myself, she said. It feels like remembering something I was always meant to be. He leaned in, slowly. Then let me mark you, he said, voice a hush of velvet and want. Not to claim, but to show you that I belong to you. Evelyn's breath stuttered. Do I have to do anything? She asked, teasing, because if she didn't diffuse the moment with humor, she might actually combust. He smiled. Just say yes. She reached for his hand. And whispered, yes. The ritual wasn't elaborate. It didn't need to be. Lucien used the sharpened blade to prick the pad of his thumb. Just enough to draw blood, not enough to wound. He pressed it gently to the hollow of her throat, just above the space where her heartbeat pulsed steady and certain. Then he closed his eyes. And whispered her name. Not Evelyn. Not Daisy. Not a title or a prophecy or a claim. Just her. Her name, spoken like a vow. The heat that unfurled beneath her skin was not violent. It wasn't even painful. It was warmth. Recognition. The sense of yes etched into flesh. When she opened her eyes, Lucien was watching her. And in his gaze, she saw no dominance. Only devotion. It wasn't just heat. It was memory. Lucien's blood had dried where he'd touched her throat, leaving a faint mark that shimmered slightly under moonlight, nothing dramatic, no flare of light or prophetic thunder. Just a quiet imprint. Like a signature. Like his soul had reached out and written "I am yours" into the soft hollow beneath her chin. Evelyn pressed her fingers to the spot and felt the warmth linger, not magical now, but physiological. Familiar. Comforting. He hadn't moved since. He sat just inches from her, head bowed slightly, breathing deliberately. As if giving her space was part of the ritual. As if his desire was bound by reverence, not hunger. She'd expected something primal when she said yes. Something feral and consuming. But what she got was gentleness. Lucien's version of hunger wasn't devouring. It was worship. "Does it always feel like this?" she asked, her voice low. He looked up. "Like what?" "Like, my skin is still breathing you in." His lips twitched, almost a smile. "It means the bond is settling. Our chemistry is syncing. You're becoming sensitive to my presence. That's science talk for I like the way you smell now, isn't it?" Lucien finally smiled, genuinely, openly. "No. That's your biology developing a scent-triggered oxytocin response to my proximity." She gave him a playful glare. "Wow. Sexy. I can say it slower." Evelyn laughed, and then the sound faded, quiet and tender, because when she met his eyes again, they weren't playful anymore. They were full. Of her. She shifted closer. Her body, still humming with residual magic, leaned into him like a magnet finding north. Lucien's breath caught, barely audible, as her fingers came to rest just below his jaw. "Can I kiss you again?" she asked softly. He blinked. "You don't have to ask." "I know," she said, drawing in a slow breath. "But I want to." This time, when she leaned in, he met her halfway. Their lips brushed first, just barely, tentative, like a question without punctuation. But then he deepened it, and the air changed. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't savage. It was knowing. A meeting not just of mouths but of memory. His hands cupped her hips as though he was relearning her shape. She pressed against him like she had something to prove, not to him, but to herself. That she could want. That she could have. That this wasn't surrender to instinct but a declaration of self. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want you," he said. "But not because of the bond. Because I've seen you. And I think I've loved you before I even knew what love meant." Her throat tightened. "Lucien. And I would wait again," he added, his voice hoarse now. "If you needed time. If you changed your mind. Even if it burned me. It was too much." And exactly right. Evelyn climbed into his lap, wrapping her legs around his hips, her breath uneven. "I'm not changing my mind." He swallowed. "Then tell me how to love you." She held his face in her hands. "Start with this." Their bodies moved slowly at first, like learning choreography already written in their blood. He guided her gently, with the restraint of a man holding something precious, and she responded with the confidence of someone finally laying down armor. They kissed between words. Touched between memories. And when the last of their clothes fell away, there was no ceremony. No crescendo of supernatural theatrics. Just bare skin. Warmth. Breath. The human pulse of intimacy. Lucien kissed the space above her heart before moving inside her. And Evelyn broke. Not from pain, but from the unbearable rightness of it. She'd never understood what it meant to be wanted, not for utility, not for compliance, not for being less inconvenient than someone else, but for being herself. Lucien moved like worship and need in equal measure. He whispered her name. She gasped his. They moved as though the world was finally letting them rewrite what it had broken. And when it was over, when their bodies stilled and sweat cooled between them, she lay tangled against him in the silence. It wasn't just physical. It was freedom. Later, as moonlight filtered through the pine above them, Evelyn traced a line along Lucien's chest, resting her hand over his steady heartbeat. "So," she said sleepily, "do all werewolves mate like that? Or are you just particularly good at being emotionally devastating? Lucien gave a low chuckle, his voice raw. Just you. You mean I bring out your best performance? No, he said, catching her hand. I mean there's only ever been you. She exhaled. Say that again. He kissed her fingertips. There's only ever been you. Chapter 11 Mating Season. The Highlands were not quiet. They breathed. Lived. And during mating season, they sang. It wasn't melodic in the human sense, there were no violins or orchestral swells, but it was music all the same. A sound carried on the wind like smoke and instinct, howls that called to each other in the dark, deep-throated purrs of contentment, rhythmic thuds of feet and bodies moving in tandem. Everything here had rhythm. Purpose. Hunger. Evelyn had never seen anything like it. She stood at the edge of a clearing hidden within the highland woods, a veil of pine needles swaying gently overhead. Around her, wolves moved like dancers in a ritual no one had written down, but everyone knew by heart. Not all were shifted, many were in their humanoid forms, but all carried that same edge of wild, as if they wore their bones like borrowed coats, their real selves humming just beneath the surface. Lucien stood beside her, broad-shouldered and steady, his arm brushing hers. She exhaled. So, this is wolfkin tinder. He huffed a laugh. We call it the rite of returning. But yes, it's a courtship ritual. Does it always involve that much nudity? He glanced at the circle of wolves ahead, pairs forming, circling each other, some already tangled in what could only be described as aggressively public affection. Mating season is instinctual. The wolves choose partners. Bonds form. Some last. Some don't. And it's all consensual, she asked, keeping her tone light, but her gaze sharp. Lucien turned toward her fully, his eyes serious. Always. The bond doesn't ignore refusal. We scent desire, but we scent boundaries, too. If there's no resonance, it's done. Evelyn nodded slowly. It's just a lot. I know. He softened, gently brushing his knuckles along her wrist. This isn't your world. You don't have to like it. You only have to feel what's true for you. That, more than the ritual, unraveled something in her. Because he didn't want her to be like them. He just wanted her to be. They were guests, but not outsiders. Word of Lucien's return had spread along with whispers of the human woman he had not just chosen, but marked. Some wolves bowed when they passed. Others growled low in confusion or disapproval. None challenged them outright. Evelyn felt their gazes like heat on the back of her neck. She knew she didn't belong. She also knew she wasn't leaving. Lucien led her to a fire ring at the periphery of the ritual grounds, where less traditional wolves gathered, those who watched without partaking, or who hadn't yet chosen. One of them, a lean, silver-furred male in humanoid form, gave Lucien a respectful nod. Blackmore, he said. It's been too long. Lucien inclined his head. Rillin. His eyes flicked to Evelyn. And this must be the human. Evelyn lifted her chin. She has a name. To her surprise, the male smiled. Spirited. You'll need that. Lucien's hand brushed the small of her back. She doesn't need your approval. I didn't offer it. Rillin's grin widened. But I see what she is. And what's that? Evelyn asked, tone even. Not prey, he said simply. Not anymore. The mating rites began in earnest as the moon rose higher, silver-washed and brilliant. The wolves formed pairs and circles, some shifting fully into their beast forms before rolling through the snow-dusted grasses in spirals of heat and sound. It was strangely beautiful, raw and primal, yes, but honest. There was no performance here. No artifice. It was biology wearing its truth out loud. Still, Evelyn sat stiffly beside the fire, her limbs tight, her stomach a knot of second-hand tension. Lucien noticed. You don't have to watch, he said gently. She shook her head. No. I want to. I need to understand what I'm part of. He waited. She continued, slower now. I think I've spent my whole life choosing structure over instinct. Research over experience. But this, it's not barbaric. It's terrifying because it's intimate. Lucien exhaled softly. Yes. They know who they want. Yes, he repeated. And they ask with their bodies. Lucian turned fully toward her now, knees brushing hers. That's what I want for you. Not pressure. Not fear. Recognition. Evelyn looked down at their hands, now linked, his thumb rubbing slow, thoughtful circles against her skin. I see you, she said, voice barely audible over the fire crackle and distant howls. His eyes darkened. Then ask for me. She blinked. What? Claim me, he said, his voice low. Like I'm not your fate. But your choice. Her heart thundered. And then she did. They left the clearing without a word. No grand gestures, no nods to the wolves who still moved and circled and sang beneath the full moon's silver crown. No ceremony. Just Lucian's hand at the small of her back, Evelyn's breath coming in short, high-altitude exhales, and the shared understanding that neither of them needed the rest of the world to witness what they were about to say, to show. The forest beyond the glade was quiet. Not silent, no, the woods were never truly still, but hushed. Reverent. The kind of quiet that existed when something sacred was about to happen. They reached a grove where the snow had melted back from the earth, revealing moss-soft ground and a crescent of birches that leaned together like conspirators. A few fallen leaves clung to the ground, and the air shimmered faintly with residual magic, old, passive, and oddly comforting. Evelyn could feel it hum along her skin like a tuning fork. Lucian turned to face her fully. You didn't have to leave with me, he said, voice low. I didn't have to do any of this, she replied. And yet here I am, voluntarily neck-deep in mating season and emotionally charged wolf rituals. His mouth twitched. You could have stayed and watched the chaos. I've had my fill of primal public displays for one evening, thanks. Besides. She looked up at him, eyes soft but direct. I wanted to be with you. Not the idea of you. Not the version you are to them. Just you. Lucian inhaled slowly. You already have me, he said. Good, she replied, stepping closer. Because I'm not particularly interested in sharing. He cupped her face then, his palms warm, thumbs brushing over the arch of her cheekbones as though reacquainting himself with her topography. I would give you anything, he murmured. But what you ask of me, being only yours, is easy. Her heart twisted, aching in the most beautiful way. I know I joke about fate, she said, hands sliding up to his chest, resting over the beat of his heart. But this doesn't feel like something that was scripted. This feels like something we built. From fragments. From ruin. From choice. Lucian leaned forward, his forehead resting against hers. Then tell me what you want, he whispered. And I will answer. Evelyn smiled, slow and devastating. Lie down. His brows lifted, but he obeyed without question, because of course he did. Because Lucian, despite the wolf, despite the power in his blood and the fire in his bones, had always known the strength in yielding. Not to dominance, but to trust. She followed, crawling onto his lap with deliberate slowness, and settled above him, her knees bracketing his hips, her hands planted on either side of his head. I want to reclaim something, she said, eyes scanning his face like a map she now knew by heart. Not just this bond. But myself. My choice. My desire. I want to be more than marked. I want to mark you back. Lucian's breath stuttered. Then do it. She kissed him with a kind of reverence that rewrote the word. Not tentative. Not urgent. But complete. Her lips traced the curve of his jaw, the hollow beneath his ear, the scar that bisected his collarbone like a story waiting to be read. She tasted salt and pine and something uniquely him, the flavor of promises made and kept. Lucian let her lead, his hands resting lightly on her thighs, gripping only when her tongue slid past his lips and her hips shifted with purpose. She moved slowly, methodically, the way a scientist might explore a newly discovered star system. Awe, precision, and an undercurrent of wonder. Every time he gasped, when her teeth grazed his shoulder, when her fingers slid beneath his shirt, he whispered her name. Not as plea. As prayer. They made love on the moss, half-dressed and open to the sky, the scent of snow and soil in the air, the forest around them humming in response. It was less wild than the rituals they'd witnessed, but no less raw. No less real. This wasn't about ceremony or tradition. It was about sovereignty. About two people standing in the ruins of what had once been fate and building something better. Afterward, Evelyn lay sprawled across his chest, tracing lazy lines over his skin, her head rising and falling with each breath he took. "You're warm," she said softly. "I'm full," he replied. "You do that." She tilted her head. "I'm still adjusting to this new version of you." "And which version is that?" "The one who's not dying. The one who can take a compliment without flinching. The one who chose me back." Lucian rolled onto his side, gathering her close. "I would choose you in every lifetime," he said. "In every form." Evelyn's eyes fluttered closed, her body finally, deeply at rest. "And I," she whispered, "would choose you even if you were still that scruffy stray who tracked mud into my kitchen." Lucian grinned against her shoulder. "Especially then." Chapter 12 Queen of the Beasts. There were no thrones in Ironfang's council chamber, just stone-carved benches arranged in a crescent around a fire pit that hadn't been lit since Magnus last stood before it. The room echoed with damp cold and old power, the kind that had been hoarded instead of shared, passed down through bloodlines like family heirlooms and unspoken grudges. Evelyn stood at the center. She wasn't crowned. She wasn't cloaked in wolf pelts or smeared with ritual paint. She wore a leather jacket Lucian had scavenged from the ranger's outpost, a tunic that might have once belonged to a royal scout, and a look that said she didn't need approval to speak, she just needed the room to shut up long enough to listen. They did. Eventually. Lucian stood at her side, arms crossed, jaw set, radiating silent support and the kind of low-key menace that made people think twice before interrupting. "I'm not here to play queen," Evelyn began, pacing slowly in front of the semicircle of gathered wolves. "I don't want your deference. I don't want your fear. And I definitely don't want your pity." A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. Senric, lounging casually on the far left, tilted his head in vague amusement. "I want a conversation," she continued. "And yes, I'm human. Which means I'm not governed by mating cycles or dominance rituals or who ripped whose throat out during the last blood moon. But it also means I see things you don't." "Like weakness," someone called from the back. "Like waste," Evelyn snapped. "You're a society of incredible power, and you treat half your population like furniture and the other half like weapons. That's not efficient. That's self-sabotage." Lucian smothered a grin. She was doing it using science and logic like a scalpel, slicing through centuries of entrenched alpha ideology with nothing more than a sharpened tongue and data-driven fury. Anthea watched from the shadows. The High Seer had arrived unannounced, her green eyes unreadable beneath a hood embroidered with constellations. Evelyn could feel her gaze like a low hum against her bones, not judgmental, but curious. Measuring. Recording. "The human has teeth," someone murmured behind her. Evelyn didn't turn. "You say that like it's a surprise." She raised her voice again. "Look, I'm not here to dismantle your culture. I'm here because I live in it now. I have a mate, a life, and apparently a mystical bloodline no one warned me about. So I figured, if I'm already tangled in this mess, I might as well do something useful." Senric straightened, his smile sharpening into something more serious. "And what would you propose, Queen Hartwood?" "I told you," she began. He held up a hand. "It's a title, not a prophecy. You've already earned it." She blinked, momentarily thrown. Then, "Reform," she said, firm again. "Education. Representation. Let wolves choose roles by skill, not birth rank. Let Omega wolves speak in council. Let women lead packs without bloodshed. You have the resources. You just need to stop pretending your traditions are infallible." Another wave of whispers spread. Senric nodded slowly. "And who enforces these changes?" Evelyn looked directly at him. "We do." Later, when the council had dispersed, some grumbling, some intrigued, a few looking at her like she just walked off a battlefield instead of a podium, Evelyn and Lucian sat together outside the chamber beneath the bone-laced arch of the inner court. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Lucian tilted his head toward her. "You were magnificent." She looked sideways at him. "I may have just turned your family tree into a flaming feminist manifesto." He shrugged, entirely unbothered. "It needed pruning." "You're surprisingly chill about all of this. I'm not chill. I'm proud. Also vaguely aroused. Evelyn huffed a laugh, then leaned against his shoulder. Do you think they'll listen? Some of them already are, he murmured. The rest will catch up, or they'll find out what happens when a woman who can bend stone with her heartbeat decides she's tired of being ignored. She smiled. God, that sounds so dramatic when you say it. Is it not? Okay, fine, it is. But I reserve the right to rebrand it as constructive civic engagement. Lucien turned and kissed her temple. Whatever name you give it, it suits you. The first to approach her wasn't a warrior, a noble, or a silver-cloaked seer. It was a kitchen girl. Maybe 15, maybe 20, it was hard to tell under the soot and years of silence etched into her expression. She stood in the corridor outside the old stone bathhouse with a cracked jug of water balanced on her hip and a look in her eyes that Evelyn recognized instantly, the bone-deep calculus of whether it was worth the risk to hope. I liked what you said, the girl said quietly, her voice pitched low like the stone around them might be listening. Evelyn blinked, then smiled. Thanks. I wasn't sure anyone in that room had ears, honestly. The girl didn't laugh, but a corner of her mouth twitched. My name's Myra, she said. I'm not supposed to talk. Omegas don't, we don't usually get to have opinions. Evelyn's smile faded into something softer. Well, Myra, let me tell you something very inconvenient for your oppressors. Opinions are remarkably difficult to suppress once they start forming. Myra ducked her head, but her voice was steadier now. Do you think things will really change? Evelyn didn't give her false hope. I think change is messy. And slow. And most of the time, the people in power pretend not to see it until it's staring them in the face. But yes, I think change starts with conversations like this one. Myra nodded. Then I'll keep talking. And just like that, Evelyn realized she'd won her first convert. Not through blood. Not through dominance. But through solidarity. That night, Lucien found her in the observatory tower, what had once been a place of stargazing, now half abandoned and used primarily for long, brooding silences. She was sitting cross-legged on a broken slab of marble, nursing a cup of something warm and herbal that tasted vaguely like pine needles and hope. You're scheming again, he said, entering with his usual graceful silence. I'm reflecting, she replied. Which is like scheming, but with more existential dread. He lowered himself beside her. Want to tell me what's eating you? She glanced sideways. Do you think I'm playing with fire? He considered that. Probably. But you're also fireproof. Evelyn laughed. Lucien. Be serious. Your brother ran this place like a militarized wolf cult. I show up, wave a few logical arguments around like a magic wand, and suddenly people are quoting me in the kitchens. What if it backfires? He sobered. It might. But that doesn't make it wrong. She leaned her head against his shoulder. You're very good at the whole stoic ally partnered to a righteous feminist witch thing. I've had practice. Oh yeah, she teased. Past life. I had 6 older sisters, he said dryly. One of them once taught me algebra using threats and goat entrails. Evelyn snorted into her tea. Do you want to know why I think you'll succeed? Lucien asked, after a pause. Because I'm too stubborn to quit. No, he said softly. Because you don't want to rule over wolves. You want to lift them. That's what makes you dangerous. And extraordinary. Her throat tightened. And for the 100th time since meeting him, since that snowy night in the woods when she'd brought home a stray and accidentally adopted a prince, Evelyn wondered how she'd ever lived without someone who looked at her like this. The next morning, Evelyn woke to the smell of hot bread and the sensation of fur brushing her calf. Lucien, half-shifted and lazily sprawled across the furs, had apparently taken it upon himself to occupy her entire bed like the world's most smug, possessive furnace. She reached down and poked the tip of his twitching black ear. You're hogging the covers, Blackmore. He grumbled something unintelligible in wolf speak and nuzzled her ankle. I have things to do, she said, biting back a grin. He huffed and shifted fully, bone-cracking and seamless, until the man was lying beside her, gloriously unbothered and only mostly clothed. Like what? He murmured, sleep-rough and golden-eyed. In sight another revolution? Maybe, she said, pressing a kiss to his temple. But first, I was thinking of teaching the Omegas how to make soap. He blinked. Soap? Yeah. You know, basic hygiene, sanitation, the stuff that'll keep them from getting sick when winter rolls in. Lucien blinked again. You're fixing the werewolf kingdom with soap. And education. And maybe a better grain storage system. He rolled onto his back and laughed. Not because he didn't believe her, but because he did. Chapter 13 Pact of Rebellion. They met in the old root cellar beneath the orchard. It had been abandoned long before Evelyn ever arrived at Ironfang, forgotten by generations who had traded food preservation for conquest. The air still held the scent of earth and fermentation, but it was dry, secret, and most importantly invisible to the patrol routes Lucien had memorized with eerie, almost annoying accuracy. The perfect place to plot against a kingdom. Am I the only one who finds it slightly poetic, Evelyn said as she lit a stubby beeswax candle, that we're planning a rebellion in the literal basement? Isolde grinned from across the room, a slice of her long silver blonde braid coiled over one shoulder. We're not planning a rebellion. Yet. You're here. That counts. The young princess, who had once rolled her eyes at Evelyn with such casual aristocratic dismissal it could have passed as a national sport, now sat cross-legged on a crate of expired preserves, sharpening a blade and humming. Progress. Anthea emerged from the shadows without a sound, her cloak of green-grey feathers catching the faint candlelight. A rebellion is not born from fire. It grows first in silence. Like roots. Evelyn gestured at the room. Well, we're definitely underground. Step 1. Complete. The conversation that followed wasn't loud. It was careful. Measured. Evelyn didn't make speeches. She asked questions. How many wolves had gone missing under Magnus's rule? How many humans had disappeared during tribute cycles? How many young wolves had died during rites they weren't strong enough to survive, simply because tradition demanded it? Cynric arrived late. Which was either calculated or dramatic, and Evelyn suspected it was both. He entered with his usual feline elegance, wine-dark cloak trailing behind him and an expression that said he knew he was being watched and liked it. You really ought to reconsider candles, he murmured, taking a seat near Evelyn. They're charming, yes, but dreadfully flammable. Especially when your cause is already incendiary. I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Fire Hazard. Cynric smiled, but his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. You're serious, then? About this change? I'm serious about giving people a voice. Even those who would use it to undermine you. Yes, Evelyn said. Because if I only want power for myself, I'm no better than Magnus. And if I can't handle dissent, then I have no business leading anything. There was a pause. Then, you're not like Daisy. No, she agreed. I'm not. But I think she'd want me to finish what she started. After the others had left, some nodding, some silent, one, Rillin, tossing a peeled apple core at the wall in a vague show of support, Lucien joined her beneath the fruit trees. He leaned against the gnarled bark of an ancient pear tree and studied her like she was an equation that only got more elegant the longer he examined it. You're forming a council, he said. Yes. An unofficial one. For now. Lucien tilted his head. You realize this is technically sedition? I prefer constructive dissent. He chuckled. You are either going to revolutionize this kingdom or be assassinated in your sleep. Evelyn stepped forward, wrapping her arms around his waist. Can it be both? Because I've had some truly unhinged dreams lately, and I think that ship may have sailed. His smile faded into something more solemn. You know I'll fight with you, he said. But my blood still ties me to Magnus. To everything this place was built on. I don't want you to choose sides, she said softly. I want you to help me build a new one. Lucien bent down to kiss her brow. Then I'm yours. To the last breath. The rebellion wasn't a banner. It wasn't a battle cry. It began with soup kitchens. Myra, the quiet Omega girl who'd first approached Evelyn outside the bathhouse, organized a network of others like her. Young women. Old men. The injured. The ignored. Evelyn taught them how to boil broth, how to preserve meat, how to share food in a way that kept the packs from descending into feral chaos during lean winters. Isolde stole medical supplies from the royal vaults. Rillin taught self-defense to a group of servant boys in the barn after hours. Anthea whispered prophecy into Evelyn's dreams, not in words but in symbols: wolves burning with starlight, silver chains melting like wax, a human heart beating in the middle of a stone circle. Cenric, ever the politician, dropped casual, unsettling truths into his brother's war meetings and then watched carefully to see which wolves shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And Evelyn listened. She charted the weak points in the hierarchy. She studied supply chains and silver trade routes. She learned how to speak not just in metaphors but in systems. And when wolves began addressing her by name instead of title, she didn't correct them. Because this wasn't about monarchy anymore. It was about momentum. The summons came as expected. Not through parchment, not even by proxy, but through the wolves' oldest language, dominance. A sharp knock at their chamber door at dawn. A soldier with 2 clean hands and 2 flat eyes. And a simple message delivered without inflection. The king would have words. Now. Lucien didn't flinch. Evelyn did. Not because she was afraid of Magnus, though, to be fair, any man who could kill with a thought and rule with a snarl probably deserved at least some psychological real estate, but because she knew this was no meeting. It was a performance. A test. And the only thing more dangerous than defying a tyrant was impressing him. "Don't wear red," Lucien said absently as she pulled on boots. She blinked. "Why not?" "He hates it. Thinks it's theatrical. And I should not wear it. Why?" Lucien smiled faintly. "Because we don't need to provoke him on purpose." Evelyn slid on a dark tunic instead. "Fine. But I'm not bowing." He touched her jaw. "Wouldn't love you if you did." The king's solar wasn't built for comfort. It was built for surveillance. Windows faced all the main corridors. Mirrors were placed at strategic angles. The hearth was always burning, not for warmth, but to backlight his silhouette into something looming. Mythic. Inescapable. Magnus stood with his back to them, arms behind him, like a war general surveying a battlefield that only existed in his mind. Lucien approached with the rigid grace of a soldier. Evelyn didn't. She walked like herself, upright, deliberate, with her chin high and her spine daring anyone to snap it. Magnus spoke without turning. "I've been hearing things." "That's impressive," Evelyn replied. "Given how often people avoid speaking in your presence." Lucien gave a nearly imperceptible twitch beside her, the universal signal for maybe don't poke the bear just yet, but Evelyn had already committed. Magnus finally faced them. His eyes were silver, not the soft, wintry kind that looked poetic in poetry, but the kind of silver that tarnished everything it touched. His smile was almost kind. Almost. "You've been busy," he said, stepping toward her. "Soup kitchens. Literacy workshops. Training programs. And, my personal favorite, an unsanctioned council of dissenters. Do you know what I call that where I'm from?" Evelyn tilted her head. "Democracy?" Magnus's smile sharpened. "Treason." Lucien stepped in then, not physically but vocally, a shift in tone, a shield she didn't ask for but appreciated all the same. "She's done nothing in secret," he said. "Every initiative has been public. Voluntary. And, frankly, effective." Magnus didn't even look at him. "Tell me, little brother, when did you trade claws for cleverness? When it became obvious your methods were bleeding the kingdom dry." There it was. A silence like oxygen being sucked from the room. Evelyn was almost proud of him. Until she realized Magnus's gaze had returned to her with renewed interest. "Do you know what I find fascinating about humans?" he asked. "They corrupt everything they touch. They create systems to control their chaos, and then they burn them down just to feel something." Evelyn didn't blink. "And do you know what I find fascinating about tyrants? They think fear is the same as loyalty." The king stared at her. And smiled. The meeting ended not with exile, or death, or even raised voices. Just a single phrase, spoken softly as Magnus walked past her. "You will either become Daisy, or be consumed by her." And with that, he was gone. Evelyn stood in the empty room a moment longer, her fingers clenched into fists and her heart an unsteady metronome. Lucien touched her shoulder. His rattled, he said. His threatened, she corrected. Lucian nodded. Even better. Back in their chambers, Evelyn paced. I don't want this to become a war, she said, more to herself than him. Then what do you want? Lucian asked gently. I want choice. For them. For me. For the wolves who are still afraid to speak. She stopped pacing. But I don't know how to protect that choice if Magnus decides to crush it. Lucian watched her in silence for a moment, then rose. He crossed to her, placing her hands flat against his chest. Then we do what wolves have always done, he said. We protect our pack. She looked up at him. And if the pack is scattered? Broken? He smiled, slow and sure. Then we teach them how to howl again. That night, Evelyn drafted her first real strategy. It wasn't a battle plan, it was a blueprint. 4 food distribution. 4 messenger routes that bypassed royal checkpoints. 4 hidden shelters carved into the cliffs. For an underground press that would print not propaganda, but poetry, philosophy, and science written by wolves who had never before been allowed to write anything at all. And at the bottom of the parchment, in ink still drying, the revolution will not begin with fire. It will begin with ideas. Thank you for listening. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe for more beautiful tales. Tap the next thumbnail to continue your journey.